What makes South African companies so successful internationally? This book is called Going Global, and it's been compiled at GIBS, and it's all about South African companies that have done remarkable things not only here, but have also expanded internationally. I guess it's all about management, Dr Lyal White.
Yes, it's all about management and how South Africa, as a country and as a society, have bred remarkable or extraordinary companies and general managers to drive those companies and leaders to drive those companies.
Now, you've chosen very successfully and very succinctly a handful of companies that have succeeded. Not everybody's succeeded. Australia has been a particular death knell for so many corporate ambitions, hasn't it?
Yes, we know about some of the Australian stories. Pick n Pay, I suppose, comes to mind.
Pick n Pay, Westbank, lots of companies.
The list is endless. In Latin America, we know that Mr. Price expanded into Latin America in the late 1990s. Obviously, a very, very poor timing around that, around the crises in Argentina and elsewhere. And those are obviously stories to learn from as well. Those are some of the examples that they can look back on and say, well, you know, these are the way, or this is the way we expanded into those markets, and these are the lessons that can be learned from them.
What has made the successful companies expanding into other countries successful? What has been the defining factor?
Well, in the introductory chapter, I highlight 7 or 8 key variable or key examples from these companies, or common traits that they share, areas of leadership, how their affinity to cultural diversity, their willingness to learn from others, best practices, but also from their own track record. So the good and the bad stories, the successes and those that were less successful. And these are common traits that are among the global success stories of some of the South African companies that have expanded into these new markets, international markets, and especially into the dynamic markets, where what we call high context societies, where really the context really matters, and where these companies have managed to develop their general management expertise based on the political economy environment in South Africa and the social and cultural diversity from which they have hailed.
The most remarkable example of that has to be SAB Miller.
Yeah, SAB Miller obviously is one of the best examples in the way it has expanded and succeeded in many markets across Africa, Asia. Snow is now SAB's largest brand.
Snow, for anybody who doesn't know, is more consumed than Budweiser. Budweiser used to sell itself as the world's most drunk beer.
Yeah.
And now Snow, which is drunk lukewarm, I don't know what it tastes like, but it's drunk in China by Chinese people. There are a lot of Chinese people who seem to like Snow.
Yes, the Chinese have developed an affinity for the amber liquid, and Snow is certainly one of SAB's, or it is SAB's largest brand. But another thing that sometimes is unknown by many around SAB and Anglo-American is that Latin America is now SAB, Anglo-American, 2 companies of South African origins, largest markets, largest earning markets. You know, obviously, Anglo-Americans got investments in Brazil and Chile. SAB Miller bought Bavaria in Colombia some 5 or 6 years ago, and the returns on those businesses are enormous. So what the South African environment and, again, the social and the cultural nuances in the South African environment have prepared these companies for is for the adversity and the complex and complicated environments in markets like Colombia and even Afghanistan in the case of MTN.
But they've all made mistakes. They've all made some serious blunders, some very costly blunders, but maybe that's just part of the school fees. Old Mutual paid considerable school fees, more than 100 billion rands worth, as it went in and made some very ill-advised acquisitions at wrong points in the cycle. Companies do make mistakes.
Yeah, they make mistakes, and you know, there was an old adage about, or from one of the great business leaders that said, go out there and make mistakes. Learn from your mistakes.
It's not your money, it's only shareholders' money.
Well, you know, in the end, a lot of the things, or a lot of the traits around these companies is also going or looking beyond the bottom line, or expanding the bottom line to include areas of sustainable development and the contribution to broader societies in the markets in which they are going. So another important attribute around these companies is how they engage with governments, but how they engage with the locals and the society in which they are investing. So, for example, building and nurturing talent, empowering the locals, really leaves or develops a relationship of trust and confidence with the company or with the countries in which they go in. MTN is a wonderful example of this in Nigeria.
It was a company that did not exist 20 years ago.
No, it's incredible. The story of MTN is one that is remarkable. In the book, we talk about what their ambitions were at the time in the early 1990s and how they grew to today. I don't think anybody could have envisaged this.
They anticipated that by 2010 they would have 350,000 subscribers.
And today they have
160 million.
160 million subscribers. And their biggest markets are all outside of Southern Africa. Their biggest markets are Nigeria and Iran. Quite incredible. When I travel to Nigeria and you talk to Nigerians, the biggest contribution that South Africa have made in that country, apart from all the diplomatic interaction and bilaterals that we have with that country, is through MTN and through the grass-level development of connectedness that MTN have given to Nigerian citizens. MTN is our best example of economic diplomacy on the African continent.
Okay, one final question, an honest answer, please. How much of going global is to do with the ego of the chief executive of the time?
I don't know how much it's got to do with the ego, but it's got a lot to do with the leadership at the time. If the leadership has vision, if they have the energy to implement and have the legs to carry this out, they'll go a long way. And we can see this in companies like SAB Miller and MTN, and even Anglo-American at the time of Julian Ogilvy Thompson and the likes. When Julian Ogilvy Thompson looked at Latin America, I asked him once, I said, "Why did you go to Latin America?" And he looked at me with that typical twinkle in his eye and he said, "Well, it all happened by chance." And it wasn't decisions, or they weren't decisions that were made on a spreadsheet. They were decisions that were made from the gut and the intuition that they had developed over time. And that's what has made these champions, these South African champions, global champions at the same time.
Okay, so does vision lead to success and ego potentially to failure? It depends on your motivations for going global potentially.
Well, I would say that these leaders need to look at where they're going and what they're doing and learn from their mistakes. And they need to be very, very receptive to criticisms that are coming their way and to the voices from their general managers that are in the markets in which they are going.
Dr. Lyal White. The book is called Going Global. It's published by GIBS, and it is a fascinating insight into some of South Africa's more adventurous corporate histories.